Yes. So, as I said before, oftentimes when your food truck is operating in multiple jurisdictions, things can stack up. Hopefully, in the state in which your food truck is operating, they'll only need one health department permit, but they might need multiple health department permits. They might need one from every county that they operate in. Obviously, they're going to have to comply with all of the municipal rules depending on where they're located, but does that municipality also require a business privilege license in addition to any specialized kind of food truck license? Does the corporate entity, well, the corporate entity will definitely need to be registered with the Secretary of State. If you're operating across state lines, do you need to register as a foreign corporation in the state in which you're operating? Likely so. Also, if your corporate name is different from your operating name, you might need to file assumed name or doing business as forms in every city or county in which you operate. If you're allowed to have just one health department permit for that state and operate county to county, you typically will have to communicate with each county's health department in order to notify each county when you're going to be operating in that county and when you're going to be operating elsewhere. And so typically this involves a monthly sending out of a chart saying where you're going to be and when you're going to be there. Finally, a lot of times sales and use tax will differ quite widely from county to county or city to city. And so you do need to keep track of where you're making the sales of food so that you can collect and pay the proper sales tax and report it to the proper city or county. So food trucks still they've definitely gained kind of a critical mass. Everyone knows what a food truck is, but they are still new to the point where there are going to be a lot of cities that don't have regulations that govern food trucks. And so you might have the, it's kind of an enviable position. If you have a client who comes to you who wants to operate a food truck and the city doesn't have regulations and they're drafting them, you might be able to advocate and help that city draft regulations that are more favorable to food truck clients. So I did kind of want to point out a couple of examples of cities that are a little bit harder to work in because of the rules that the city has passed. And so these might be kind of tips for things to avoid if you do have that position of being able to help your city draft regulations for food trucks. In New York, they have a limited number of street vendor permits, and so this includes all mobile food vendors. And so a lot of these permits were already taken up by hot dog vendors or gyro vendors, and so there's not a lot of room for food trucks in New York. They only allow 3,100 in New York City. And so what you'll see here is that this has created kind of a black market for food truck permits where holders of some of these 3,100 permits have basically they rent or lease the right to use their permit to you for a couple years, and these black market transactions can cost as much as $15,000 to $20,000 just to obtain the permit. And even once you've obtained it from them, you really have, because it is a black market, your client won't have any kind of recourse if they, if the permit lapses, if they do something, if the original holder of it does something that's inconsistent with it, or if they sell it to two different vendors. You've seen that before, where they'll kind of double sell it, and so basically you'll use it for a month, and then all of a sudden someone else is attempting to use it. And so that is it's a very controversial situation, and also just a very dangerous one. There's no protection for your client if they are attempting to buy one of these black market permits. Other regulations in New York that make it a little bit more burdensome is that their food trucks are not allowed to park at metered spots on the street, and there are certain streets that are restricted at certain times for high traffic situations. And so it really limits where food trucks can operate in the city. So even once you've gotten the permit, it might be hard to find the right place to park and right place to vend. So another city that has maybe less workable regulations is Chicago. In Chicago, they have a very strict proximity rule where food trucks are not allowed to park within 200 feet of a restaurant entrance. it's great in Chicago. There are so many restaurants, but this does create a situation where entire swaths of the city are not open for food trucks because of the number of restaurants in the area. Chicago also has time limitations on how long a food truck can be stopped in one spot. They can't just get a space for the day and continue there. Finally, with private property, they have restrictions on, they don't allow food trucks on vacant lots, which are typically the #1 targets of food truck operators because you're obviously not in anyone's way. As long as you get permission from the property owner, they feel like it should be okay. But in Chicago, I believe food trucks are kind of a secondary zoning use, and so you do need a primary zoning use on the property before you're allowed to operate a food truck there. And then also there are time limits as well for the private property stops. So even if you're on private property, that doesn't prevent you from having these restrictive time limitations. So there's a really great paper by Brian Farkas, and he kind of outlined, he interviewed a lot of municipalities and outlined what they're looking for and what concerns they have when they're drafting food truck regulations. And so I've written down a few of the things that he's identified. If you do get the opportunity to work with regulators, city regulators, these are the things that you're going to want to address and discuss with them, and these are things that they're going to be concerned about. And so these are a good way to kind of advocate for your client's position. They're interested in equality of opportunity. How is it going to affect the current businesses in operation in the city? How is it going to contribute to the development of the economy and the community? Improve the citizens and workers, quality of life. Obviously, things that they're going to look for. They're going to want to make sure that the regulations adequately protect public health and safety. Ensure that food trucks can kind of work within their current zoning ordinances, and make sure, of course, that they obtain the proper fees and taxes. So if you have that position of being able to work with the municipality, these are things that you can talk about to help them maybe see the food truck side of the story and see what might be best for them. So.